Hello, this is Dr. Lee Hildebrand, and this is my Thrive podcast today. And a topic that I want to address today is something that I think can be very helpful to many of us. And the topic is letting go of approval or the need for approval. When you really think about this, how much of our life is shaped by wondering about what other people think about us? This is something that can come to our mind in a lot of different contexts. And let's think about some of the examples of this. For instance, have you been in a situation where you rewrite a text because you're wondering what the other person's going to think about what you have to say? Or situations where you're checking on social media repeatedly to see how many people are going to like your last post? Or avoiding decisions that you may need to make because of fear of criticism. Sometimes we even change our opinions or our behavior to try to avoid the discomfort of potentially somebody else not approving of what we're doing. So really, this approval seeking can become a very exhausting and a limiting habit that we can develop. And the problem is that we can sometimes lose a sense of freedom. Freedom begins when we can accept a really simple truth. And that is, it's none of our darn business what other people think about me. This can be a really helpful strategy. Now let's talk about some of the detriments that we can experience with people pleasing. One of those first detriments is that we can develop a little bit of hypervigilance if we're trying to scan and read the room and always figuring out what people are thinking about what we're doing or what we're saying. And in fact, the research shows that people pleasing in some studies correlates with higher anxiety, increased depression, and burnout, and potential emotional depletion. Now, there are some studies on self-determination theory by DC and Ryan that show that well-being improves when people act from an internal set of values in terms of their true convictions versus the external approval of what others think. And what can happen if we're trying to continually do what we think other people are expecting from us? In other words, you could phrase it as an imaginary audience. And this is actually a concept for teenagers in teenage development, is kind of looking at their life with this imaginary audience, evaluating everything that they're doing to see if it's cool or, if they're enough. So we can start to lose a sense of our authentic identity if we're trying to seek approval, and that becomes a real compass in terms of our approach to life. Our personal boundaries can even become blurred. And people pleasers often struggle with things like setting boundaries. Setting a boundary meaning, in other words, letting other people know how you want to be treated or what you're willing to accept in terms of treatment. And then another part that it can impact people pleasing can impact our ability to make decisions with confidence if we decide that we're going to do something. It can also lead to a fragile self-worth. A self-worth that is other-focused and mainly tied to what other people think outside of us can be really unstable. And the opposite is true if we really have value that's beyond what public opinion is. We may have some more stability in that. Now, let's note some of the extremes. We're not talking about the extremes here. Obviously, to some extent, we want to have regard and apply the golden rule, and that is to treat people the way we would like to be treated. We do want to have respect and understanding for what the needs and opinions are of those around us. However, what we don't want to do is we don't want to go to the extreme with that, and that's what we're talking about here. Now, social media has really stoked this phenomenon in regard to the dopamine that is produced when you're doom scrolling or you're really focused in on social media, and this attention to How many likes do I have? You know, when we're looking at that or we get a like on social media, it can feel it's a dopamine hit. That is a neurochemical in our body that is associated with pleasure. It's the origination is L-DOPA, and in our brain there is a reward center that when we experience certain things like approval, etc., that can be like a little dopamine pump. Now, research has shown that social media validation mimics a reward system similar to gambling. You know, we're trying to put things out there and take shots with things. You may be trying to do that and seeing if you get the kind of response from others that you desire. Another study from Harvard and UCLA also show increased neural reward activity that is tied to social approval online. So this is important to understand that there's this dopamine feedback loop, and it's crucial that we don't find ourselves getting addicted to the approval of others. This can really cause problems in our life. In fact, one aspect of this social media phenomenon is the next post syndrome. And our identity can become so performance-based in terms of the people will take a lot of time to take pictures, like pose for them. I've been in public contexts, even like state parks or on family trips, and I'll see people that are literally taking, over an hour to take the right kind of photos of themselves in order to put the best impression management out there with others. And a part of this is we've developed a comparison culture where people are comparing themselves to others. There's almost a perfectionism in regard to photography, in regard to image, in regard to what's presented. And a lot of times this correlates with a reduced life satisfaction in terms of trying to chase the gold medal, so to speak, in regard to this media approval. There's an old phrase that approval on social media is rented, it's not owned. People's opinions are fleeting. People's opinions are fickle. People's opinions will change. And the real reality check here for many of us, if you think about it, for most people that are watching this, we're going to be forgotten in 100 years. We spend enormous amounts of energy trying to manage these impressions of who we are, and we become so preoccupied with our own lives. But the truth of the matter is the universe and most people are not going to remember our daily decisions. And many of these things are things that we're renting. These moments in time, our home, our cars, we're just kind of borrowing these things for a while during the time that we're here. So it's important to have some perspective in regard to this and then really ask ourselves what really matters. How important are these things? The ancient Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius from the Roman Empire emphasized the temporary nature of things, how reputation and opinion in these things are so fleeting. Now, Marcus Aurelius is one of the exceptions to this from the standpoint of his name has been remembered. But there are millions and millions of us where that's not the case, and that's okay. Because those that love us most will remember us in those moments where we're there for them. This also reminds me of another unavoidable truth, and one of my mentors said this to me once, and I'll never forget it. He said, "Hey, Lee, people will like you until they don't." And this really gets at the sense that human approval is fluid, it's very situational. The same qualities about us that can sometimes attract people in a certain season can repel them later on. They can get disenchanted with us. They can get bored with us. And same with us with other people. There's a fluidity. There are chapters in terms of our relational life. And it's important to find the ways to be present and really appreciate and enjoy those connections in the time that we have. But some of these connections are not going to be lifelong. Some of them may not last longer than months or years, in some cases days or weeks. So it's important that we don't think about approval as the foundation of our value. One of the greatest values that we have is that we're children of God. We're imbibed with specific value just in terms of our being. We don't have to create that through approval with others and attention with others. So let's talk about how we can develop some resilience around being ourselves, where we can have some psychological freedom. This is something that we can aspire toward in terms of having greater emotional stability in regard to our lives and reduced anxiety, reduced overthinking about things. We can try to make decisions with clarity, to weigh things the best that we can with the values that we have and that are important to us, and then to execute those decisions, whether it's the clothes that we're going to put on our body in a given day, or it's what we're going to do with our time, or how we're going to approach our relationships. And if you think about it, authenticity contributes to stronger relationships with those that we're around. Authenticity attracts deeper, more meaningful connections. Close relationships, those people that are really genuine relationships, people on our team, these relationships are going to be fueled by honesty, by vulnerability, not performance. The people that are really our people are going to see us as we are. They're going to accept us as we are. And they're going to love us as we are. They're going to love us unconditionally. They're going to want the best for us, regardless if they get something out of it. This is something that I call true belonging. So part of this is there are times in our life, quite sincerely, where we need to learn to ignore the peanut gallery. Who's the peanut gallery, you might ask? Those are the casual critics, the social media commentators, the doubters, and the armchair quarterbacks of our life. The people that project their own fears upon us or their jealousies. Think about a time that you had an idea or you wanted to execute something, and others in your life maybe have thought that it's foolish or I can't believe you're doing that. You know, my years together and the adventures that I've had with my wife, both in business and family and other ways, we've done some things that have been out of the box. We have focused on some things, like when we started a real estate investment and community organization in urban area of Milwaukee. There's other things that we've done that have just, seemed a little bit out of the ordinary, that others have been naysayers. But frankly, the key to this is you need to think about putting aside those voices of the peanut gallery and taking true wisdom from those that actually have wisdom. Constructive feedback is helpful. Let's make a distinction here. We want to value constructive feedback. But chronic criticism for the uninvolved observers in our life, I want to just call that noise. That's not going to help us. If someone is not carrying responsibility for you in your life, they should not be carrying the authority over your decisions or judging your decisions if they have no skin in the game. That's not helpful. So what actually matters in life in regard to who we are in our relationships? Close relationships are key. Genuine relationships are key. At the end of the day, our cars are going to stop running. Our houses are going to continue to break down. The things that we borrow and that we own, but I'm using the term borrowing because of the temperance of all of this stuff, those things are going to pass. And relationships can pass too. But at the core, research consistently shows that strong relationships, quality relationships, are one of the predictors of long-term happiness. Interestingly, there was a Harvard study of adult development. This was a decades-long study, and it showed that relationships really are the best predictor of life satisfaction and health. And there's been many other studies that have corroborated this. One of the keys that we need to consider in our life is, how do we add value to others? How do we bring value in situations? How do we contribute meaning in our day-to-day? A lot of time, being of service to others builds our self-worth, and it helps us to internally anchor in what's important. So live according to your values. Seek integrity over popularity. Seek purpose over perception. Let me talk about some practical steps that can help you to let go of approval seeking. First of all, take notice when you're performing instead of really living. Practice small steps of authenticity daily. Try to be yourself. You as yourself are enough. Many of us can think of people that we just know that no matter what the context is, they are who they are, and it's a beautiful thing, and we appreciate it. Other people view you that way too, that best part of yourself. They're going to like that better than your attempts at impression management. Set boundaries when you need to, without over-explaining. If you don't want to go somewhere in a respectful and nice way, say, hey, I'm not going to be able to do that. Limit your social media comparison. Take heed and watch how much you're engaging in social media, because this can just be a magnet for the kind of thinking in regard to comparing our lives with others. Ask yourself this when you're thinking about doing something. Would I still do this if nobody saw it or applauded? Would I still engage in this? In closing, I want to reinforce a key idea. Most people are too worried about themselves and busy with their own lives to be studying you. A lot of times, people don't really care. Now, I'm not being a pessimist. I'm not saying that people don't have care for other people, but I am saying sometimes we're paying so close attention to ourselves that we can sometimes assume that others are paying an equal amount of attention to the details of our lives, and that's just not the case in practical terms. Again, it's none of my darn business what other people think about me. All I can do is focus on these things: to seek to love people deeply, to show up, to live honestly to the best of my ability, to try to contribute meaningfully to the lives of other people and to our families, and accepting that the approval of others is temporary. But integrity, in terms of being the best that we can be in a situation in an authentic way, that is what really lasts. I really hope that you have found this talk today to be helpful. I know these are issues that can trouble many of us, and I have some suggested book and research references. First of all, there's a book that I ran across when I was at a store up in Door County called Kick Ash. They have great granola and coffee in Ellison Bay. And they have this little library section, and there's a book called The Courage to Be Disliked. Really interesting book. So feel free to check that one out. And there's also one by Brene Brown called The Gifts of Imperfection. That could be a helpful read in regard to these things. And with the Marcus Aurelius reference, he wrote a book called Meditations, which has some really poignant and cool things in regard to understanding life and what's important in life. So thanks so much for tuning in today to my Thrive with Dr. Lee Hildebrand YouTube channel. I hope that this has been informative. Please feel free to share this with anybody that you think could benefit from what's been shared today. Thanks so much, and please feel free to like and subscribe if you like the content of Thrive. Take care.